Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on our show. I'm Armando F. Sanchez, and I'm very, very honored to have Thelma T. Reyna, PhD, be on our show to introduce to us Carla Rachel Sameth. Outstanding book. Outstanding book. Put out by Golden Foothills Press. So, Thelma today is going to present to us the author. We're going to talk about what's in the book, not all the details, because it has to be read. It has to be something you sit down and you're going to have to try to stop from reading it. Because once I started, I kept trying to, like, other things came up, and no, I want to read it all, but I can't. It's an exciting, in-depth book about the human condition. With that, let's bring in Thelma T. Reyna, friend to everyone who is a poet, a writer, anyone who's trying to figure out how do I get my message out in print. Talk to Thelma. She is the person to go to. But with that, pass it over. Thelma, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you so much, Armando. It is my pleasure always to be on your show and to be a part of the conversation with you and the wonderful authors who always agree to come on board and share their thoughts, their feelings, their wisdom with us. So this is a very happy occasion for me. I am really honored to be introducing our star for the show tonight, Carla Rachel Sameth, who is the award-winning author of a brand new book that our Golden Foothills Press has just issued, One Day on the Gold Line, a memoir in essays. Carla Rachel Sameth. Let me tell you a little bit about Carla before we turn things over to her. Carla Rachel Sameth is a co-poet laureate for the 2022-2024 term in Altadena, California. And in addition to the One Day on the Gold Line, she wrote a chapbook called What Is Left, published in 2021. Carla holds an MFA in creative writing for Queen's University of Charlotte, which is a Latin American program, and a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Carla's work has appeared in a variety of literary journals and anthologies, and she has won national honors, including a Pushcart Prize essay nomination last month for one of the essays in this wonderful book that we're going to be learning about today. To learn more, please visit her website at Carla Sameth, CarlaSameth.com. So welcome, Carla. Thanks for being here with us. Looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Thank you so much, Thelma and Armando.
I would like for Carla is going to start out by reading the very first essay in her book about a burning boat. Yes, a burning boat. Wait till you hear this essay. And then after that, Armando and I are going to be taking turns talking to Carla about various aspects of this wonderful book. So Carla, take it away.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to be reading an excerpt from the first chapter, The Burning Boat. That night on the ferry from Italy to Greece, I felt I was performing a sort of tashlik, the Jewish New Year's tradition of symbolically casting off sins and regrets of the previous year in the form of breadcrumbs tossed into flowing water. Earlier that evening, the warm ocean night had wrapped me in a peaceful feeling of embarking on something new while leaving behind my recent losses, as if I'd tossed them into the ocean. It was 1991, and I was 32 years old. I was fighting to recover from what felt like the biggest loss. I had been engaged and living in San Francisco when I accidentally got pregnant. I dreaded having another abortion. The first one 2 years prior, while in another doomed relationship, had felt necessary. But it had left me sunk so low that I was like a poster child for the anti-abortion movement. This time around, not realizing I was pregnant, I had been taking medication that could harm the fetus. After much research and agonizing indecision, I terminated the pregnancy. When my fiance and I split up, I lost hope of having a baby in the near future and in the dreams I had for a lasting relationship. The quicksand of unrelenting regret threatened to swallow me up again. I made a new plan. Go away on a magical trip overseas, Europe, Greece, maybe Turkey and Israel, then return and buckle down to the serious business of job, house, and baby, but on my own. A noise broke into my dreams, ending the blissful quality of my sleep. Drunken sailors, I thought, and rolled over, hoping to recover my dreams. The pounding and shouting of "wake up, get out" in broken English continued. Groggy, I tried to sit up. I staggered out in my pajamas, no bra. Passengers had fallen asleep up against one another, languid, cozy, on top of blankets strewn about them. Children sleeping on parents and dogs sprawled in between. On the ship deck, the idyllic scene had shifted to chaos. Dozens of sailors tried to climb the mast of the ferry, fighting with some kind of mechanism to lower the lifeboats, clearly something they had never had to do before. Other sailors stood looking agitated, puzzled, waving their arms and shouting orders in Greek. Families and lovers whom I had envied the night before seemed frenzied, panicked. Children and parents clung together, some cried, some held babies. Dogs ran the length of the deck, barking or huddled with the children, whimpering. The sailors managed to lower the lifeboats, which dropped one by one into the water with loud, messy splashes. Sailors shuffled women and children onto the lifeboats. Some couples refused to be separated. Strangest of all were the dogs. Some men remained on board while the dogs went on the lifeboats. On deck, an Italian man attempted to comfort both his wife and me, though I was dry-eyed. Like me, all the usually elegant Italian women were braless, but the men must have gone to bed with their Italian suits pressed and ready to jump into, because that's how we saw them now. They were beautifully and immaculately dressed, not a wrinkle. I was hustled along into a lifeboat by momentum. No one stopped to ask if I wanted to be saved, but I got in obediently. In my lifeboat, people were crying and crossing themselves. A German woman insisted desperately to herself, "My husband, he is still on the ship, but he is a good swimmer." A lifeboat in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night. Complete darkness as we drifted away from our ferry. I wondered if our ship was sinking with the remaining passengers and our belongings. Would these few people around me in my lifeboat be the last ones I'd see? I didn't know them, had barely spoken with anyone on this trip. Who besides my family would feel pain at my going? Would my ex-fiance feel any regrets? Had I left anything undone? I imagined my parents and my siblings, and I felt a prick of sadness for them. After all, I would hate it if one of them died. I was no longer afraid. I had been more frightened the day before when I was in Bari, a steaming, dangerous port. Instead, a relief washed over me as I no longer beat myself senseless with self-blame, regrets, ruminations. Instead, I thought, I've led a good life. At 32, I'd experienced a lot. I glanced over at the one other woman not crying. She rocked her baby and sang softly, eyes locked with her infants. No room for anyone else. Magic. I gasped as I realized how much I wanted that. I remembered having had that life inside me, how I'd already felt like a mother. No, I said out loud, and then the boulder inside me that kept the tears in rolled out and I wept. I was not ready to die without having had a baby. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Carla. So you wanted to start out this discussion with that particular essay out of the numerous excellent essays in this book. Why is that essay such a key piece of this book?
Well, I think it's sort of pivotal because it's a moment where I am really coming face to face with just how strong that desire to be a mother is. And it also is an experience that one of those experiences that you have in life that really shape you. And temporarily, at least, you have the burning boat phenomenon where when you obviously I survived. Hi, everybody, here I am. And there is that, you definitely have that period where it feels like you're ready to just live each moment in the present, because it really makes you value that life when you realize after all you did want to live. And it's also pivotal because it's also pivotal because I went back, I survived, and I went back with a real drive to then try to have a child.
All right. Armando, would you like to come in here?
How did you both meet professionally?
Well, I mean, Thelma is like the literary citizen of the world. And we live in the same area in Altadena. That's why I have these beautiful earrings that Thelma could drop by and gift me last holiday season. And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Thelma has always been someone that tried to bring people into the literary world, either as writers or as readers. And so before I ever spoke to Thelma about reissuing my memoir, I had already participated in readings with Thelma. So Thelma was always on the lookout for emerging authors to include and to uplift. And I also have met students, like really stunning poets who were students of Thelma, Shahe Mankarian, right? Who
he was
an incredible poet who first probably realized how much of a poet he was in Thelma's class. So Thelma is is a force. We all know Thelma T. Reyna in this area.
You're absolutely right. And if I can add to that,
yeah,
thanks to Thelma, I've been able to network with writers who are from Europe as well. And so David Duffy and others, and people across borders. I think Thelma knows writers in the 7 continents of the world. So that's really a wonderful expression. And the one thing that I find is that the stories that Thelma, and like yours very specifically, that I love to read, is that it's a story that carries to people around the world. It isn't just a local story, from where we live. It's international.
I agree with that, and I want to see what Carla thinks about that too. But I just wanted to point out that one of the beauties of this amazing book is the huge diversity that is represented throughout its pages. It's multi-generational, it's multicultural, different attitudes, gender identities. We just learned so much about the beautiful, beautiful diversity that is all around us, and that's one of the great strengths of this book as well.
Well, I know that I had a conversation with Carla, and I think the word I learned from her that came to mind, and I'm asking Carla if she can talk about it, is the idea of the modern family and how that's incorporated in this wonderful book.
Well, yes. I mean, one of the things that really pushed me to want to write this memoir was that I wasn't seeing families that looked like ours necessarily in books. I wasn't seeing, I wasn't seeing the situations that I was dealing with in the same way. And so I was kind of looking piecemeal to find family and experiences that resembled something of what we were experiencing. And so you might say that I kind of wrote the book that I would have liked to have read at the time when I was struggling. A little bit about the book so it makes sense is that I did go back and struggled to have a child, and finally had my son after many miscarriages. And I really believed in the myth about how easy it would be to create family, a safe sanctuary. So I thought that my son having a mother who was a queer Jewish mother, and my son being Black and Jewish, and being part of a single parent or even a blended family would make life more interesting for him, but it was so much more difficult. And a lot of the book is about the challenges that we faced in terms of race, homophobia, police violence. Later on, probably the biggest struggle, my son's battle with drugs. I frame it as a battle. It sounds a little bit, I don't know, dramatic, but that's kind of, as all of us know who have dealt with family members who have struggled with addiction, it is a battle.
It absolutely is. And a lot of these things that you've just enumerated, Carla, they are not presented in a linear fashion at all. This book, you know, I know that a lot of people, when they think of a memoir, they automatically think of chronology. Well, this is the book that is a story of, you know, John's life, of, you know, President Kennedy's life. So it's going to go from the beginning through the end. And some memoirs, like biographies, autobiographies, are written that way, but yours is not. And that is another thing about your book that really makes it more innovative, more enjoyable, because your book is not linear. It doesn't go from 1 month all the way through. You skip around a lot. Again, you started out the book with this burning boat in the middle of the Mediterranean. And then the very next chapter or essay in your book is a wholly different time period. Tell us why you chose that format instead of the traditional chronological one, and how you feel that affects your telling of your story.
Well, I would say two things. One, the format of a memoir and essays, as opposed to, and that aren't chronological, as opposed to it's a straight book length memoir, is when I was writing, and I wrote most of my life, but I got sidetracked being a single mom and working and bringing home the oatmeal. And so when I was taking a workshop at one point, I had a writer, Joyce Maynard, actually tell me, you know, you really need to be writing book length memoir. You know, I was working on a shorter essay, and I got really intimidated. So I thought, you know, where would I have the time and the wherewithal to do that? And she said, well, you know, here's an example, and showed me a memoir and essays. Now, how did it be in terms of number of the essays are in sort of an alternative, non-traditional format. They're not chronological, as Selma says. But it has to do a lot with, and I teach as well, and we learn that memory is fragile and memory is fraught. And when you're writing memoir, you are telling your truest truth. How do you recover all those memories? And many times memory is not linear. And so one of the ways to get into those memories is to approach it in a way that wouldn't necessarily be this happened and this happened and this happened in chronology. At one point when I was working on the book, I told a friend, you know, I really think I need to write about some of the things that happened to my son as he was getting a little bit older, you know, before he barely even had hair under his arms, and was a young Black man who was suddenly dealing with a lot of disturbing incidents, and I was acutely aware of the danger posed to him as a young Black man in this world. And I couldn't figure out how to approach it. She said, right, how about writing about things that happened to my Black son as he got older? And so I started out with a list. In another case, I was writing about addiction, and I realized, and some people might raise their eyebrows at this, but I realized that there are actually, you know, sometimes things are so terrible and absurd that there is humor. And I come from a culture, the Jewish culture, where we probably wouldn't have survived without humor. Mm-hmm. And so even within addiction, as terrible as it is, there is humor. And that humor often starts with looking at yourself, right? That's the first person you're supposed to poke fun at when you're doing stand-up, which I did for a little while. So I wrote, a lot of us know the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. And it's when this happens, when you turn 4 months and when you turn 6 months, and kind of reassuring. And so I wrote a mock chapter to that called What to Expect When You're Expecting, when Molly is not a schoolgirl, that had to do with what to expect if your child is using drugs. And though it was about serious content, it was actually pretty humorous, and that helped me be able to access that and get that down, and possibly made it more accessible to readers as well.
You know, when I received the book and I started to read it, at the very beginning, my first thought was, wait a minute, this is mostly a book about women for women. That was my original thought. And I thought, okay, well, this is not going to make sense to me, being a bit chauvinistic on a personal level. But as I started to go further into the book, I realized, wait a minute, if I get past that and I look at this as the life of a person, you know, i.e., you, and beginning to see how you were impacted, how others are impacted, how my family could be impacted, how I could be impacted, then I started to sort of merge myself into the story, and I forgot about that. Now I realized, no, this is not a book only for women. This is for human beings.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because I originally also, when you're writing a book, people ask you who's your audience going to be, and I think I did originally think that a lot of the audience would be women of a certain age, mothers, people who I was hoping to provide just some connection to women who are struggling with some of the same issues. But then I found, after the book was published, and even as I was publishing individual essays, that I had men and people of all different ages approaching me and saying, oh, I really related to this essay, or maybe they related on a different level. I had one young woman come up to me who say, this reminded me of my mother and what she's gone through. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and I think part of the book is also addressing, what do you do when things get so bad? Like, where do you find that core strength to go on? Where do you find that resilience? Or when it pretty much seems you should throw in the towel. And I think that's something that anyone of any gender can relate to.
I think it's wonderful. And there are numerous very strong men in this book that were key. When you had the episode regarding police abuse, shall we say, and you were assaulted and ended up in the hospital and suffered a lot, physically, emotionally, everything. One of the strong men that helped you out in that situation was your former husband. And another strong man, of course, was your son, who came to your side and reassured you and held your hand. So yes, the men are not as obvious and out there in this book, but the men are presented in a very sympathetic manner, and they are really, really key also to a lot of the important things that happened to Carla. So men, pick up the book and read it, and you're going to see yourself. You're going to see yourself in a lot of these stories, because we're all in it together, as the pandemic cliche went, and we are. So Carla, when you were putting together your book and these linked essays, and by the way, could you take just a second or so to remind the audience, or maybe those who haven't heard of linked essays, what does that mean?
Well, it distinguishes it from an essay collection, which could be a collection of essays that an author writes, also nonfiction. But you can pull them out and read them one by one in any order, usually. Whereas with linked essays, I'm looking at it's a book, they're almost like chapters. Mm-hmm. And so as a whole, they tell a story. And so there is a story arc and they are connected. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. Carla, I'd like to hear a little bit about your process as you built this book, as you created it. Did you encounter any special challenges, such as emotionally or artistically, as you were taking all these essays and linking them together into a cohesive memoir? What was your process?
Well, I wrote a number of these essays as at different times. And then when I was looking at the book as a whole, I began to write other essays that I felt were missing as part of the story. But in terms of your very important question about were there any challenges, I think I thought that I could write about this with enough distance that I wouldn't be impacted emotionally. It wouldn't be as if I was going through everything all over again. And I remember when I was about to go into the editing process after the book was accepted by the initial publisher that I worked with, somebody said to me, be gentle with yourself, because you're going down into a dark tunnel, and I did find, in order to write, to edit that book and rewrite some of the scenes, for instance, where I experienced the assault by the sheriff's deputy, I had to really place myself there. I had to relive, even look again at some footage. And I was surprised by how impacted I felt by it. And many of these events were very traumatic. Also where I was experiencing various times where I thought my son could possibly die from an overdose. And again, to really write the book, you have to go back into that scene and really access those emotions, and be present. And it was challenging. I definitely, it helps having a really supportive family and partner and son.
Mhm.
My son, who always told me, write the book, even though there were big pieces that were about him, he was very much a supporter. And the other thing is, I had to really look at, what am I going to include and what am I not going to include, because I'm writing about real people and real things that happen. And, I'm pretty much going out naked on the page. So, and I'm, I had to really think about how it would impact everybody, myself included.
Now,
And talking, oh,
is this something that happens to all writers? People who write poetry, people, and this is just a sheer curiosity, because this book, your book, is very detailed in terms of those areas, and I get the emotional side immediately from it. It's very well written. But is this common to all writers? Do they all go through this difficult challenge? And if so, this book would be a perfect example of how to work through it and be able to still put it into a memoir.
Well, there was another positive aspect. First of all, I'll say to going down into the dark zone on that was also remembering where I got my strength from, and that I survived, and where did that resilience come from, and being able to access that. But in answer to your question, I think that depending on what you're writing, I think memoir can be very, very difficult in terms of the type of material that you're writing. But let's say you're writing fiction. Now I know fiction writers who also get very involved with their characters, and it can be really emotional. And poetry, I tend to write, I often do write very about very difficult topics with poetry. So again, I hope that humor seeps through in that as well. I'm curious what Thelma would say about that question.
Thank you. Yes, there were some really difficult sections of my memoir. My memoir is Dearest Papa, a memoir in poems, and this came out in 2020, just as the pandemic was breaking out across the United States. So I never had a chance to officially launch the book, and it's a lot of people are still not aware of it. But Dearest Papa, a memoir in poems, was very difficult to write. I started it 2 weeks after the very sudden death of my husband in minor surgery, and I spent the entire first year of my widowhood writing the book, and I took it all up to the first anniversary of his death. And I'm with you, Carla. There were some things that you have to relive when you're describing it, when you're being as graphic and picturesque as you can be, that were really difficult. I found myself on the floor, sometimes in a fetal position and weeping, and but you just take it day by day. And I think that you are so correct also that when you are going through those memories, you also very much focus on your resilience, and yes, it was difficult, but how did you get through it, and how are you now as a person? Are you a little stronger? And one of the best parts about going through that trauma again, reliving it, is that you have a chance to see and appreciate a lot of aspects of that human being and your life together, that had you not stopped to be writing about it and reflecting on it, you would not be able to appreciate the depth and the immensity of that relationship, of that love. So it's painful, but it's a growth process. And so I totally understand what you're talking about, your book as well.
Well, this book, One Day on the Gold Line, pulls a lot of emotions from me as well. Like I said, I saw the connection of the need to feel, and understand. And going through her wonderful, wonderful stories, it drew that out of me as well. So I can't thank you enough, Carla, for this book that you wrote, One Day on the Gold Line. And we have the image of the book in our background as well. I have a question. You've already answered it in bits and pieces, but I'd like to sort of get a more clear answer for me. Is how is your memoir unique to others?
I think that it's unique in the sense of the story does, like, part of me wants to say other families like us, maybe in the East Bay, and Jewish, queer, Black, single parent, there, but I feel like the confluence of all the different, both who our family was and how that family was built and what we experienced, is a unique story, and I think to some degree you could say that everybody has a unique story when they're telling their memoir. So but I feel like it's also unique in that I didn't see a lot of stories that showed kind of this contemporary family building in the same way. And also, there are other memoir and essays, there are other books that have non-traditional essays within, but I think that it has some uniqueness in that as well. There's not a ton of books out like that. I think we're seeing more. So I think that it offers a view that we don't always see enough of, even though we know, right, that most families don't necessarily look like the Brady Bunch, or who would be the other? Leave It to Beaver. What were the old? Come on, what were
Father knows best.
Father
I'm
knows
really
best.
dating
But
myself.
even back then, those were myths already. I mean,
Yeah.
they were not
I will say
representative
that
of reality. They were representative of a mythology.
I know that my son went through a period before, as all the things we know about Bill Cosby were found out by widely, where he, I think, would have liked to have had a family that looked like the Cosbys on television. A heterosexual, middle-class Black family. It was a lot for him to have to deal with, the family that he was in, and harder for people to accept and understand and embrace. So yeah, I think I would say that it's still, my story, like others, is a unique story, but I think that at least when I was looking around, how about you, Armando or Thelma, do you, when you're trying to sort things out, do you ever look for other stories that you can connect with to kind of help you get through whatever you're getting through? Because I didn't find enough of those. I had to piece together. I had like 5 different books to, like, okay, this looks like me. And Thelma and I, by the way, had a discussion, because when we were talking about what we'd say about the book, and I think that Thelma had written that it was a unique story, and I said, oh, well, there's probably millions of queer Jewish single moms with Black sons, and if you go to the Bay Area, but that may not be true across the country.
Let me answer the question first. And first of all, I can answer the question now, but I have to thank Thelma for it, because Thelma has presented to me, brought me in contact with a lot of outstanding authors. And each one that I've met has given me the perspective that they all use words in books, but the meaning and the emotion is different. And through the books that I've come in contact, thanks to Thelma and Foothills Press, Golden Foothills Press, I've learned how to become more resilient as it comes more in the future. My biggest issue that I think is a lot of times is death and anger. And then there's other emotions. And a lot of her books and poets that she's brought to the surface deal with those issues. And I think more outstanding books like yours is going to be a major, major help to make us think about it before it happens, and to realize that we all need each other and we need a sense of resiliency as well. So again, I thank you for your book, and I also thank Thelma as being one of the many books that are brought to the surface. That no, I don't think there's many books like these. There's many stories like these, but they're not out there documented for the world to be able to read and appreciate.
I agree with that. And I'd like to ask Carla my last question, which is what is your dream? What do you hope is going to be left with the readers out there? So anyone who picks up your book and reads it, what impact do you want to, your book to have on people?
Thank you for that question. I wanted readers to feel less alone, to feel some connection, to feel like they were not the only one out struggling, like how Rhonda said, death and anger are issues. There's something about when you read a book where people are struggling with some of the issues that you've struggled with, and maybe you wouldn't approach it exactly the same way, but there's this depth of feeling that you're not out there swimming by yourself, that other people have experienced this and even survived and even been able to write a book about it. So I hope that a reader would take away that sense. They'd find their own. I write about my fourth grade rough and tough tomboy persona, Sammy Boy, and who my fourth grade classmates said I was like Arya from Game of Thrones. So whoever watches that, but I hope that people can find their own Sammy Boy. Like, what is it that really, what can they turn to? What can they get back to in order to feel like they can get through this world? And maybe also be able to laugh at a few things, at the absurdity and all in the difficulty and the tragedy at the same time.
Well, I, for one, believe that you totally met that goal. I really believe that. And I think that especially speaking of Sammy Boy, which is herself as a young girl that was a very strong person, was a fighter. And the final essay, by the way, in this wonderful book brings her back to that. And it does relive her experiences as a young schoolgirl and the different challenges that she had. So yes, I think, Carla, that you succeeded in your book. And I, for one, am a richer person. I think a little bit more aware person after reading your book. And I have no doubt that anyone who picks up your book and reads it will feel the way that you are hoping that they will. So congratulations on this book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those words and for bringing this book to life again.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you again, Armando, for inviting Carla and me to have this discussion with you and with our readers out there. And I'd like Carla to go ahead and share another essay with us. She is going to tell us what the essay is, and you're going to love it. Whatever she's choosing, you're going to love it. So Carla, go for it.
Okay, I'm going to read from the essay Graduation Day at Addiction High. I'm going to read an excerpt. June 18th, 2014. 8 young men in royal blue caps and gowns pose holding high school diplomas. Our boys. They have reached a milestone that I had not expected to see happen this spring. Not in my son's case, at least. They finished high school. An independent study program in Torrance, California allowed them to meet with a teacher once a week, working online from the young men's recovery house where they live. A cake decorated with their faces sits in front of them. 8 young addicts. I never thought I'd graduate on time, says Raphael, as part of his short speech at the graduation celebration. But here I am, thanks to the support of all my brothers in the house. Less than a year before that, he was taking 80 Robitussin caplets at a time. The house is the Renewal Recovery House, a home for young men on the path of recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. The large custom-built immaculate home in the South Bay area of LA is decorated in a masculine Old West motif with a wagon wheel chandelier and a black and white photo of Indian chiefs. 2 large honey-colored Labradors lounge on the patio. They have seen a lot of boys come and go. The young men sleep in bunk beds, 4 or 6 to a room. Many of them have been through several treatment programs, centers, wilderness programs, and legal actions because of their addictions. Each one has a different story, but their parents will tell you, same as I will, that their sons once had bright eyes and big dreams and were small enough to hold in their arms. Only a year before, I was dashing off to the emergency room. It had become such a frequent occurrence, I went on an autopilot. Charger, check. iPad, check. Book, sweatshirt, snacks, check, check, check. Too often I had been stranded following the 911 calls, arriving at the ER in the middle of the night, emerging only at dawn. During one long night, I told Raphael to move over, closed my eyes for a moment, and scrunched down next to him on the gurney in the ER hallway. Sometimes my son came back with me. Sometimes Raphael headed out for the 5150 mandatory 72-hour hold in a hospital adolescent psych ward, after they decided that his pattern of drug abuse posed a risk to his life. While the social workers evaluated him, Raphael had joked about rating his favorite hospitals on Yelp. I hadn't been thinking about whether Raphael might not graduate from high school when one evaluating social worker in the ER told me, "Your son says he doesn't have much more time. It's curious. He lacks affect." "He must mean until he turns 18, I told the social worker. "No, he means until he dies from what he's taking," the social worker said. "If he were 18, I would just send him home to kill himself." The thought had put me out of my mind. I was shell-shocked, pleading, angry, bereft, wondering if I should try using. Desperate not to lose my son's love, not to lose him to addiction, I had even threatened to kill myself if I couldn't stop him. Something I later heard expressed by other mothers as we recounted the insanity of trying to control the uncontrollable. I relived and regretted every decision, every trauma, every battle I fought for him and lost. Then one more time, I came home to see my son's eyes rolled back in his head. I called 911, but I knew this time was different. I told him I couldn't let him live with me anymore. I could not protect him from this disease. I said, "I love you right up to the moon and back," quoting the children's book we used to read over and over again. "Guess how much I love you. But I can't keep you alive here. You know that." We held each other tight. After my son left home, it took me a long time to figure out what I liked. The food in my refrigerator, the music on my iTunes, everything had revolved around Raphael for so long that I couldn't remember my own preferences. I hadn't lived alone for many years. Knowing I'd have to face my own demons at some point, I wanted to stay busy, but first I needed to catch up on some sleep. My therapist had asked, "What are you doing besides work, Al-Anon, and visiting your son?" "Not much," I admitted. She suggested I try improv or stand-up comedy. I guess my therapist thought I was funny. So I signed up for a class in stand-up. At the end of the series, we performed at the Comedy Store in West Hollywood. It was a packed Sunday night, but I invited only a few friends. I was a bit terrified. Our instructor had promised that after getting up on that stage, nothing else in life would be as scary or difficult. I needed that. People were stoked and nervous in the green room. Out where the audience sat, it was dark, and I tried to step out onto the stage with confidence, but I was just jumping in with my eyes shut. So, my son left home recently. I launched into my first set. It was a really hard choice, Harvard, Yale, or the young man's recovery house. Yep, he's doing his gap year studying addiction. I'm going to stop there.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carla. And again, Armando, thank you for bringing us together and sharing Carla with the world out there.
Armando, thank you so much, and Thelma as well.
It's been my pleasure. It's always an honor. If Thelma calls me and says, Armando, I already said yes. I don't even know what's going to happen next, but we're going to go there. So that's the way it is. I just come out a better person from hearing the story. I'd like to hear closing statements. Thelma, you first, and
Okay. Authors are the most important human beings on earth. Of course, I'm biased, but I believe that writers such as Carla have so much wisdom, so much insight, so many experiences to share with us. And in the gratitude and in their generosity of their hearts, they do that. Writing is a very, very difficult thing to do. It's demanding. Sometimes it's frustrating. But people who do it out of love, as Carla has, out of a desire to share her wisdom with us, are giving us a gift. So I cherish people like Carla, and I hope that anyone out there who has watched this is going to give her book a chance. Go get her book, and you will see what I'm talking about. So kudos to Carla for having done this, and kudos to all of our fellow authors out there. They make all of our lives richer. And kudos to Armando, because he supports people like us and because he helps us to get out there. So on behalf of Golden Foothills Press and the other wonderful authors that we have, again, our thanks to Carla and our best wishes for her generosity of spirit, her brilliant mind, her talent, her determination. She's one of a kind.
Wow, you're a hard act to follow, Thelma. I am so grateful to you for bringing this into the world, this reissue of my memoir, and to Armando for letting us have this conversation and doing this service of bringing all these authors to the world to meet. I really hope that people do. Of course, I hope people read my book. Read my book. But I've over the last couple of years, I've heard from people who have read it and have told me a little bit of their stories and how they felt about the book and what it meant to them. And I would love to hear from readers. If anyone wants to contact me, you can contact me through my website, carlasameth.com. And I'd really love to hear from people. So thank you both so much.
And with that, I will give the closing statements in the sense that this book, again, another of my own myths, was this was going to be a story about you, as now you live in the Los Angeles area. But your book is international. That's what I discovered. I've had the honor, my wife and I, to visit all 7 continents. And, as I was reading this book, I found that I could find this story, both tragedy and hope, everywhere in the world. And I think outstanding books like yours here, One Day on the Goal Line, I think encourages all of us to dialogue about these issues in our own lives. And the myths of Hollywood and, the perfect family and all that, I think we have to keep breaking that down and realize that we live in a new era. Your book does that. And I can't thank you enough for putting your emotions out there so that we could see it and we have the courage to look at our own and discuss it amongst ourselves. And again, this book is international, and I thank you for that. And I know maybe that was not your intent, but you definitely met that goal anyway. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I can't say enough about it. So again, one last time, where can people go to find you and also to write you emails about comments about your book and to learn more about what you're doing?
carlasameth.com. That's CARLASAMETH.com.
Well, with that, thank you both for being here on the program. Dr. Thelma T. Reyna from Golden Foothills Press, who puts out these outstanding books. You don't put out many books, Thelma, but the few that you put out, they're worldwide. It's very in-depth. And again, Carla, just my closing statements. Thank you for opening your soul to all of us and telling us we also have to find strengths in our challenges and be able to also find strength and help others as well. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Armando F. Sanchez. Please feel free to write to me if you have any questions. You can direct them to me and I'll pass them on to Thelma and also to Carla as well. With that, I'd like to say good night and thank you. And we look forward to having everyone back again to go on with your next book as well. Thank you and good night.